Welcome in to Locked On Knicks. Alex Wolfe and Gavin Schall here. And if you didn't catch it yesterday, we started breaking down the Athletics NBA player rankings going into this season. Spoiler alert, it was not favorable. And today, that trend will continue. We are going to explain why Immanuel Quickley was robbed, why Quentin Grimes and RJ Barrett are also robbed, and also decide if Josh Hart and Mitchell Robinson were robbed as well. Lots of robbery going on. We'll we'll call on the authorities next on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, welcome in to Locked On Knicks. Today's episode is brought to you by Birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA or enter promo code LockedOnNBA for a free white tech hat with any purchase like I'm wearing right now. You won't want to take your Birddogs off. We promise you that. And we want to thank you guys for making Locked On Knicks first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform or taking in the sights and sounds on YouTube. We appreciate you making us a part of your daily routine. And make sure that you hit that auto download function on your favorite podcast app or the notification bell on YouTube so you never miss an episode. And if you want to keep the conversation going with us, you do so right on your phone, right through your text messaging app using Subtext. So check that out in the episode description to see how to sign up today and talk with us whenever you want. I'm Alex Wolfe. I'm editor-in-chief at Knicks site, The Strickland, which you can find strick.land. And he is Gavin Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster. And Seth Partnow is not our favorite NBA writer's favorite NBA writer at this moment, as he came out with this ranking, this dirty, terrible list of players that just robbed the Knicks over and over. Gavin, break down for me real quick why it is absolute highway robbery that Immanuel Quickley finds himself outside the top 100.
All right, so Seth is we discussed it a lot last episode. He is a big numbers guy, right? Let's just reiterate. He has Immanuel Quickley at 102nd on this list. In the four metrics that Seth uses to rank players, Immanuel Quickley is 31st, 62nd, 15th, and 31st in the NBA. So you add that all up, roughly, I don't know, should be about the 32nd best player in the league, right? Instead, he's outside the top 100. And here are some of the names that he is behind: Spencer Dinwiddie, Karis LeVert, Bogdan Bogdanovic, Herb Jones, Jordan Poole, Gary Trent Jr., DeAndre Hunter, Canada's most wanted, Dylan Brooks, Jonas Valanciunas, Tobias Harris, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and one spot ahead of him, inexplicably, D'Angelo Russell. What are we doing here? What are we doing here, Alex?
I don't know, man. And you know what one jumps out to me there too is like Jordan Poole. I'm like, didn't that guy just get salary dumped off a team like with real aspirations? Like, did he not just get salary dumped for Chris Paul? Like,
he's had some big playoff games. Immanuel Quickley has never had some big playoff games. I will say that. Beyond that, he is one of the worst defenders in the league. Immanuel Quickley is one of the best guard defenders in the league, and they're very similar offensively. In fact, IQ, pretty clear cut, had a better offensive season a year ago than Jordan Poole. So I don't know what's going on there. D'Lo is I cannot imagine, I mean, I can, but hard to find a bigger gap between two players defensively. Offensively, I will take Quickley every single day of the week. So we can kind of maybe, Alex, like frame this the same way we framed the Jalen Brunson one. What is Immanuel Quickley missing that has some of these other guys ahead of him? You can say a playoff resume. I would posit, as I have at different times on this podcast this offseason, that despite the fact that Quickley, I think we both agree, objectively played pretty badly before getting hurt, this playoffs in some ways was a real testament to his ability, that the Knicks were an absolutely elite offense and an even better defense when he was on the court in the playoffs, despite the fact that he shot terribly. I think they're around 87th percentile offensively, around 98th percentile defensively when he was on the court, obviously mostly against the Cavs because he got hurt so early against Miami. And I'm sure some of what Seth saw is some of what we saw. Like, he looked pretty lost offensively, felt like all that confidence, the bravado that defined his incredible regular season fell off. And yet, again, the Knicks were still far better for Immanuel Quickley being out there. And part of that was because of the lineups he was going against, who the Cavs were playing, like how top heavy they are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And yet I think those metrics get to the heart of Immanuel Quickley's value as a player, and Seth's own metrics get to the heart of Immanuel Quickley's value as a player, Alex, is that he does a million little things that you don't necessarily pick up on, but make your team better, which you cannot say about the majority of those guys I just listed.
Yeah, I mean, the only guys that like you start looking at and would say, okay, you know, maybe this is a guy that no matter if he's shooting well or not, you know, is gonna like still help the team out would be like Herb
Jones, maybe?
Jones.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what's the same guy. Yeah, like
Yeah.
other than that, I mean, it's like mostly just a bunch of not to lump all these dudes together, but by my estimation, kind of a lot of chuckers, a lot of guys that
Glenn
like
Brooks is an awesome defender. I'll say that. But
yeah, I guess that's true. But like, I think a lot of guys that if their offense isn't going, don't provide you much on the basketball court. You know what I mean? And guys that sometimes will shoot you out of a game too. You know, there's some of these guys that are ahead of him that you've seen. You know, these guys expect like 15 shot attempts per game or whatever, and sometimes they just keep shooting even when the team, you know, even when they're not making them and it's like hurting the team. And I think we've seen that from a number of these guys. On top of like DeAndre Hunter, he's been largely viewed as a bust to this point in his career. I mean, I don't know how you put a guy like that ahead of a guy that was just the runner-up for the Sixth Man of the Year award, and in our eyes, at least the rightful owner of the Sixth Man of the Year. I feel like when we discuss Immanuel Quickley with that, it's like some like Lord of the Rings type stuff. Like he's the rightful heir to the Sixth Man of the Year. But he was robbed.
Yeah.
It's the boy who lived. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, on top of that, there's other guys, you know, that you even had in the players who possibly shouldn't be ahead, where it's just kind of like guys that are just kind of floating by on reputation. I feel like at this point, like guys that, you know, aren't necessarily this list. Again, we went into this in the last show, but like this list claims to be about this coming season. And when you have guys like Kyle Lowry, who other than a good like playoff series against the Knicks or whatever, like did not like he was like borderline almost out of the NBA last year, like for most of the year, until he kind of refound himself. Mike Conley, who's just been bouncing around, you know, being a journeyman role player at this point. Russell Westbrook, who talk about guys that are almost out of the league. I mean, he is so close to that point at this point that it's like, how would you rank him above a rising player going into the fourth year of his rookie deal? You got Vucevic. Like, what has he contributed to, like, other than mediocrity at this point? And then just a bunch of guys that I would say are like provide sort of like lesser, like versions of what Immanuel Quickley does on his worst night without the possibility to pop off for like 40 points on any given night, like an Alex Caruso, a Bruce Brown, a Marcus Smart, honestly, who doesn't really knock your socks off scoring that much and is just really more of a defensive presence. You know, guys like that, it just kind of, I don't know, it's irksome to me.
Yeah. And I guess I'll play devil's advocate a little bit, because when we talked about Jalen Brunson, I disproportionately used his playoff resume as an argument for, all right, he needs to be higher because he did this in the playoffs. And again, if you do that with Immanuel Quickley, I think that's where when I was writing this list down and I put some of those guys in the possibly should be ahead, I think I wanted to maybe return the favor and disproportionately take into account playoff performance, where someone like Lowry, I mean, again, it's maybe wouldn't have happened if Quickley hadn't gotten hurt, but that Heat series was obviously better than anything Quickley did in the playoffs. Russ found new life on the Clippers. I watched that series as someone who roots for the Phoenix Suns. He was pretty awesome. And turn back the clock a little bit. Same with Mike Conley, had a good playoffs and really helped flip Minnesota's season. Like all that stuff was great. But for next season, the idea that those guys have more value than Immanuel Quickley, Lowry's a part-time player at this point. You expect him to play about 40 games per year. Russ still just murders your spacing and is a space cadet defensively. Conley is there's just no way he's better than Immanuel Quickley this year. Even someone who is about 40 spot or maybe 50 or 60 spots higher than him, Chris Paul. Like, I don't think there's one, maybe a team like the Warriors, just because they're so focused on having veteran know-how and savvy and winning now. But I cannot imagine there are more than 4 teams in the NBA at this point who would take Chris Paul over Immanuel Quickley for next year. And that's not disrespecting Chris Paul. The guy, despite not winning a championship, in some ways is the ultimate winner, always trying to find these slim little margins, but just cannot stay healthy into the playoffs. And even like when he was healthy last playoffs, Alex, he's being left open and being dared to do something and couldn't really do much. Gets picked on defensively, gets picked on bringing the ball up the court. While Quickley is clearly on an upward trajectory. We're talking about a dude, I keep referencing the stat, but as a starter last year, 24-5-5 on pretty close to 50-40-90 shooting. Again, you take into account context. If he's on a different team, he might be an all-star this season. So I don't know. Obviously, we have our biases. We're inclined to see the good in the Knicks guys over the non-Knicks guys. But again, I look at, you can throw out other names. Klay Thompson looked washed a lot of last year. Alex Caruso is a one-way player. Josh Giddey, who hasn't really he's fun, but he hasn't proven a whole lot yet. John Collins, Atlanta couldn't trade him if they were dying to. I say all that to say, I don't really get it. I don't get Immanuel Quickley being that low.
Yeah, I don't either. And just another injustice in the history of Knicks and players rankings. And maybe two more injustices coming up in just a second with Quentin Grimes and RJ Barrett. But Gavin, do you want to real quick let everybody know where we got these cool hats from and also potentially our shorts that we're wearing right now?
Yeah, Alex, there are friends over at Birddogs who I don't know if I've ever done this before, but I'm putting them in the Locked On Knicks Sponsors Hall of Fame, because at this point they have sent us the hat, a mug, 3 pairs of shorts, and a pair of pants. And I am going to go home from this vacation I'm currently on in Phoenix and probably buy double that because they are that good. This is one of, if not my favorite clothing product I've ever gotten for myself. They make you look so good. And I am typically, I'm not someone who spends a ton of money on clothes. My girlfriend would tell you, not particularly fashion inclined. And yet, Alex, I wear these, I feel like $1 million because they are so incredibly comfortable. And that's a credit to their revolutionary, stretch fabric. There's always this issue where regular shorts are made of stiff, restricting cotton. I never feel good. I never feel like I can move. But Birddogs, they're the Albert Einsteins of the shorts industry. They invented cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki but stretches, so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. And they use anti-stink, sweat wicking fabric that's great when you're in Arizona and it's 120 degrees here, and you don't want that to be an issue. So go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA or enter promo code LockedOnNBA for a free tech white hat. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA or promo code LockedOnNBA for a free tech white hat. You won't want to take your Birddogs off. We promise you. I know that's the case for both Alex and I. All right. Immanuel Quickley. That was an injustice. Quentin Grimes and RJ Barrett. Is this finally, Alex, belatedly? Because I know we've spent now an episode and a half or so ripping on the guy. Is this where we give Seth Partnow some flowers for one, recognizing Quentin Grimes? I scrolled through this list for the first time tonight, and I was pleasantly surprised that he was on here. And RJ Barrett, who I know in the past, Knicks fans have taken issue with him not being on this list. I think he is about appropriately ranked. Given his regular season last year, maybe I'll get killed for this. I would not have had a problem with him not being on this ranking. But what did you make of Quentin Grimes and RJ Barrett? Quentin Grimes being ranked 112th, RJ Barrett being ranked 113th.
Yeah, I mean, particularly in the case of Quentin Grimes, I still have issues.
Nice.
Surprise, surprise. I mean, this is a guy who, for the first 2 years of his career, has proven on decent volume that he can shoot 38% from three in his first 2 years in the NBA. Also raised his overall field goal percentage up to 47% from 40% his first year. Doesn't need the ball a ton, but does all the things that you want. If you want to talk about playoff success, I mean, he literally was the Knicks spacing other than Jalen Brunson against the Miami Heat. And it was sorely needed, just to soak up opportunities because he already is garnering that level of respect from guys. On top of which, I mean, if you look at the advanced numbers, love Quentin Grimes as well because he defends his butt off. And, again, if playoff success plays into this, which it seems it does when it's convenient, the guy locked up Jimmy Butler on one leg. He for as much as Jalen Brunson did to, propel the Knicks to get as far as they did against the Heat, Quentin Grimes played some like game-changing one-on-one defense on what this list says was the best player in that series by a wide margin in Jimmy Butler, and like managed to completely neutralize him for whole stretches of games to give the Knicks a shot. I don't know. It's small gripes at this point. I could make a case that I think that it's wrong to put some of the guys that are even ahead of IQ ahead of him, like Caruso, Bruce Brown. I mean, I know he had a really good year and he got paid, but like I struggle to put him ahead and be like, he's definitely going to influence more than this starting shooting guard on a playoff team that's going to like presumably get better, because Grimes showed last year he could get a heck of a lot better overall. And he showed a huge uptick, in what he was capable of. But then just as far as guys that are even between Quickley and him, that I take umbrage with, Kevin Herter. Sorry, I don't see that. PJ Washington literally isn't even signed with an NBA team at the moment, I might note. So if you need an idea of how the league views him at this particular moment, I think he's really talented, and I kind of wish the Knicks would make a play at this point. But whatever. Terry Rozier, you want to talk about? I mean, part now claims that like Julius Randle is empty stats, whatever. Like, what is Terry Rozier? Sorry, I mean, I haven't seen too much. Jakob Pertl, what 50th percentile center in the NBA, like slightly above average. I don't know. And then like Kevin Looney, who's, he's a key role player on the Warriors, and that's cool. But I don't really think that I would look at Kevon Looney and be like, this dude is definitely, going to provide more value than Quentin Grimes this coming year, which again is what this list claims to be. And yet so much of it feels like it's it feels like the like lifetime achievement award aspect leaks into this list a little bit and gets in the way of like what the statistical curve shows is probably going to happen this year with a guy like Quentin Grimes. So if anything, I think that he was not as disrespected as Immanuel Quickley, who legitimately had like a crazy season last year as far as advanced metrics and everything else go. But I think he should have at least been top 100. I think if I was going to put Grimes somewhere.
Yeah. I hear you. I personally, I don't really have a huge issue with any of those guys. I think you can definitely make the argument because he's such a better defender than Herter. Rozier is like, how would he look in a different context? I think I honestly like Rozier as a player. I think Pirtle is pretty good. Obviously went for a lot of value going from San Antonio to Toronto, and then they doubled down on that, giving him, I think, $20 million a year. So we'll see how that ages. Looney, I think, is awesome. Looney played pretty incredible defense on Domantas Sabonis and had a bunch of weird, like 2-point, 20 rebounds, 7 assist games in that series. I don't know. He impressed me. I think again, you can make the case, but I think Grimes is a guy, just given the lack of consistency in the regular season and the playoffs, to your point, was essential defensively, essential from a spacing perspective, but maybe partially due to an inconsistent role, partially due to injury. Didn't really get a chance to shine as an offensive option. Couldn't really take advantage of the fact when he did have the ball that Duncan Robinson was guarding. So I still think there are steps there for him to make in terms of offensive consistency and impact when he actually has the basketball in his hands. Do I think he's more exciting than the majority of the guys you listed? Do I think he's more exciting and someone I'd rather have over the next 3 years than, I don't know, like 30, 40 guys ahead of him? The Tobias Harris, the Dylan Brooks, the Gary Trent Jr.'s, even someone like Jordan Poole. Like I would pretty easily take, I think Quentin Grimes, again, you want to talk about inconsistent arguments. Like you apply the Julius Randle logic to a Jordan Poole. I'm going to take Quentin Grimes over him every time, again, going forward. And I know the list is just for next year, but I think Grimes is going to be a really good player in this league for a long time. That being said, I think Seth recognized that to some extent by putting him on this list. And I think some credit is earned there, because I honestly don't think a lot of NBA writers would have Grimes as the top 125 guy at this point. I'm not watching him as much as you or me, Alex, but RJ Barrett, what do you think about that one real quick, Alex?
I think it's interesting. So RJ was ranked one spot lower than Grimes, which I think what was the count there? 113.
113.
Yeah. It's interesting because obviously you want to talk about guys whose production has been up and down. That's RJ Barrett in a nutshell. He's proven that he could score about 20 points per game, but not that he can do it particularly efficiently. And yet, if you want to talk about guys that sort of had a playoff coming out party, he sort of did this year and is currently, you can't take into account, I guess, like the international play stuff, but just using my critical thinking brain, he looks like right now he's, worked on something this offseason and seems to be, really doing some good stuff in the FIBA qualifiers at the moment. So, I mean, it's like interesting with him. I think I'd be curious to look back on Partnow's lists in the past. I'm not sure how long he's been doing these lists for.
Last 4 years, I think.
4 years. Yeah, not quite long enough for me to look at what I would want to look at. But my buddy Drew Steele wrote a really cool piece for the Strickland just the other day about how RJ really compares through his first 4 years with DeMar DeRozan and Andrew Wiggins. Like, those are the two guys that he is most similar to. And those are two guys that are ranked very high on this list. And, those guys have kind of gone different directions, in their career. Like, DeRozan still is not a super efficient scorer. He's never figured out a 3-point shot. He's never kind of become that like modern NBA shooting guard. And that's sort of what's held him back to this point in his career and held his teams back. Whereas Wiggins has sort of found his way as a more of a role player, and also has become a better 3-point shooter, a better defender, and everything else. And so I don't know. I guess I'd just be kind of curious, since this list is for this coming season, where Partnow sees RJ going. But I do know just from past things that Partnow has said about RJ that he's not super high on him to begin with. And I feel like that probably kind of reared its head here a little bit. But I do feel like, to a degree, I mean, RJ has definitely struggled with the efficiency aspect of things, but there's only so many guys you could say are like in their early 20s like that are like 20-point per game scorers in the NBA and are sort of figuring things out at their own speed. So maybe this is worth revisiting in a year if Canada RJ comes in and just like goes crazy this year. But as of right now, it's hard to be too mad about it, even if I would probably still put him over a couple of those guys that, like I mentioned, that were above Grimes also. Like I would still put him over like Pirtle or like PJ Washington or someone like that, where I'm like, those guys just are not functionally as useful as a guy that like at least can like get to the hoop and like generate free throws. And, some of those numbers are like top tier for RJ and suggest that there could be greater things coming. So I guess we'll see as far as he goes.
Yeah, I think I'm about on the same page. There's a chance that number looks dumb either way in a year, and maybe that's the mark of a good ranking. So credit to you there, Seth. But did he leave the wrong Knicks off the list? Josh Hart, Mitchell Robinson. We talk about that next on Locked On Knicks. All right, let's get into it. 2 Knicks left off the list that I think would be fair to argue probably should have made it. Josh Hart and Mitchell Robinson. So I think my issue with this is I look at guys that I think, and I'd be, again, open invitation though, maybe after how we've talked about him on this podcast, it's not going to happen for Seth to come on. Would be cool to get his perspective on it. But I think of Mitch, like we did this conversation on Twitter a few weeks ago, him versus Miles Turner, and Mitch is better than Miles Turner, a bunch of advanced metrics. Miles Turner has advantages over Mitch in a bunch of advanced metrics, but I think of them as contemporaries. I think of Josh Hart as pretty analogous to someone like Bruce Brown. The separator there is that Brown hit threes at a better rate in the playoffs and is more willing to take threes. And that is a really big deal because that kind of makes or breaks Josh Hart as a player. But again, we've discussed it a whole bunch, but you look at Josh Hart's regular season impact. He took the Knicks from a team that was on a 43 or so win pace to a 57 win pace. And that wasn't a coincidence, right? It was very much tangible. The impact he made it, and you could feel night in, night out how he was changing the Knicks team with his energy, with his rebounding, with his ability to get to the rim, and granted in the regular season, his ability to hit threes that went away in the playoffs. And I wonder if you have to take, when doing these rankings, the middle ground between the regular season performance and the playoff performance. And again, sure, we're maybe doing what we criticize Seth of and doing that and using some selective criteria. But if you're saying that, regular season Josh Hart, I think is inarguably a top 125 player, because at least his Knicks metrics painted him as like a top 40 or 50 player And same deal with Mitchell Robinson, who was maybe the best player on the court for a whole playoff series this year.
Yeah, Mitch especially, it's kind of like weird to see left off entirely off a list like this when you have guys like Jared Allen, like pretty high on the list.
Yeah, who Mitch
You have,
just destroyed, right?
yeah, right, exactly. Like literally, he snatched his soul.
That was
Similar to
3
like
months ago. It was 3 months ago. Yeah.
similar to Jalen Brunson doing the same thing to Donovan Mitchell, and yet it doesn't
Yeah.
get talked about that much. And then, like you said, Miles Turner, Robert Williams, again, like
Yeah.
we brought up Robert Williams on the last show. It's like, what does this dude accomplish to be held in this high regard? I don't totally understand where this comes from. And Mitch is one of those guys that like, there's so many advanced numbers that just adore him. Like he has been like, if this thing is all based off advanced stats, like he's always one of the biggest, players that shows up in like those, all the various like impact stats and like the Raptor and, the defensive versatility and like all this stuff on like B-ball index and whatever. He always shows up as being like, this is a very versatile defender for a 5. This is a guy that legitimately like changes games with his rebounding, with his interior defense. Like he is fully the anchor for the Knicks. And like, okay, yeah, most of his offense is just him catching lobs or getting putbacks, but he serves an extremely important role on what ended up being a really good team last year. And that's sort of just the case for a lot of these guys, that just kind of show up in the somewhat higher parts of these rankings where it's like, again, like we brought him up last show, but like a Derek White or something, it's like this is a guy that just is like a really good role player that influences winning on a good team. So I think Mitch is right there. And I think that Mitch really cemented himself this past year as like one of the best, if not, it's probably stretch to say the best as of right now, but like one of the top like 5 defensive centers like in the NBA, as far as guys that can just completely dominate a game through their defense on the inside and their rebounding. So it feels like a slight to leave him off. Josh Hart, same deal. I think it's a little harder to sort of like pinpoint it with him because a lot of his best production, like he was having a pretty mediocre year, to be completely honest, with the Blazers prior to coming to the Knicks, and then got a lot better with the Knicks and influenced a ton of winning. But yeah, I don't know. It's kind of weird when you see other guys that I would consider to be sort of his contemporaries ranked on this list. Like again, I'll bring up even just like Kevin Huerter or something like that. It's like, you really think Kevin Huerter is like influencing winning more than Josh Hart based off what they did this past year? I don't know about that. And this whole thing is supposed to be like who would potentially give you better production towards a championship this coming season. And I just don't really know how you can, how that works. But, again, I'm dumbfounded about how this whole list works based off everything that we've talked about in these last 2 episodes.
Yeah, I think Robert Williams, I mean, at a minimum 80 spots ahead of Mitch or sub 70 to 80. That's crazy to me because I don't see it. I know the impact he had a year and a half ago when Boston went on that winning streak. And at that point you could have talked me into it, but he wasn't the same guy last year. And his injury prone as Mitch is, like, he's been a lot healthier than Time Lord has the last 2 years. So it's stuff like that where, and maybe this is a good way to wrap up this episode. These lists are really hard to make. Like I find myself in terms of the arguments I'm making, contradicting the logic I use for one player and for another. And when you're doing it for the whole league, it's really tough. So I appreciate the job that Seth has ahead of him. But just as someone who watched the Knicks all year, I would find it very, very hard to make a case that RJ Barrett, like regular season and playoffs together, was a better player than Mitchell Robinson. I know Mitch really had his issues against Miami and Bam clowned him a little bit, but there's a reason Bam is deservedly a top 40 guy on this list. And I think Mitch, again, is best or second best offensive rebounder in basketball. Everything to your point he brings on defense, the NBA's highest all-time field goal percentage this season. There's some special qualities there that somewhat cancel out what he takes away, which is the chance to have ideal spacing offensively, which is significant, but he makes up for it in certain ways. And Alex, this is all, I don't know if you want to have a final comment on this or not, but it's so interesting having these conversations because it is so context dependent. And do you punish the Knicks guys for how well their team fits together, or you're not giving someone like Jalen Brunson enough credit for doing what he does in a system with essentially no spacing and maybe a little bit more offensive creativity for Tom Thibodeau, but not much more. Like that was kind of the argument I was making for Brunson over Fox. His context and his situation is so much more difficult. And all this stuff, it's very, very, very subjective. But I think we've put together pretty good cases for why a bunch of Knicks should be quite a bit higher.
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of view it as the Knicks, by playoff success, were one of the 8 best teams in the NBA last year, and it's I'd be curious where Tibbs ranks in the coach rankings now, because with such a talent barren roster, according to this list, I don't know how he ever got them that far. It's pretty tough stuff. That's my final salt to add to the final thing here. But yeah, only the 38th, 62nd, 102nd, 112th, 113th, and not ranked.
Should have won Coach of the Year again.
Should have won Coach of the Year again. Maybe another one coming up soon. Or perhaps maybe Jalen Brunson will finally get his flowers next year in all these rankings, as well as Julius Randle. Maybe the Knicks will make a conference finals or something. If you listen to Bobby Marks, apparently they might make the finals. Stop throwing those takes out there. I do not want these guys should not be allowed to say, I think the Knicks are going to make the finals. No, be quiet, because I don't want to hear it later in the season when it's like, oh, like 5 experts said the Knicks were going to make the finals and they didn't even make the second round or whatever.
If we haven't made it clear, we want cautious optimism from
optimism. Just everybody give us cautious optimism and like this much more respect, and that'll be good. That'll feel good as a Knicks fan. So anyway, the rankings lists are stupid, but it was fun debating them. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you back for the ESPN top 100 or whatever, whenever that comes out close to the season. But also, we'll, I think, have a pretty cool special guest for our final episode or 2 of this week. So keep your ears out for that. But until next time, thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you guys all soon. Peace out.